Okay, just try to imagine this for a second. A rule book for your job that's so tangled, it took 29, yes, 29 different laws just to cover the basics. For decades, that was the reality in India. But now, that entire system has been completely rewritten. So today, we're going to untangle what this massive shakeup means for millions of people.
For years, this was the number that defined everything. 29 different central labor laws. Each one had its own set of rules, its own regulations, its own authorities. Can you imagine trying to navigate that? Whether you're a business owner or even a worker just trying to figure out your rights, it was a maze.
But the government decided it was time to hit the reset button, to consolidate that whole complex web. So, from 29 different laws, we now have, well, how many do you think?
Just 4. That's it. I mean, talk about a staggering simplification. The whole point was to cut through all the noise. All those overlapping, sometimes contradictory laws have now been condensed into 4 comprehensive codes. And this is the absolute heart of the reform.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the tangled web of the old system, why a change was even needed. Then, we'll dive into the 4 new codes themselves. After that, we'll get into what this means for employees and employers, look at a really big change that shifts the balance of power, and then, finally, we'll talk about the government's big picture goal behind all of this.
All right, so first up, let's really understand the problem these reforms were trying to solve. The old system wasn't just complicated. To a lot of people, it felt like a relic from a totally different era.
To put it simply, the old way of doing things was just a major headache. With so many different laws, it was incredibly tough for businesses to stay compliant, and honestly, tough for the government to even enforce them. A lot of these rules were ancient, some even dating back before independence. India's modern, fast-growing economy just needed a system that could actually keep up.
And that brings us right to the government's solution, a complete overhaul. The plan was to consolidate all 29 of those laws into 4 clear, functional codes.
First up, you've got the Code on Wages. This one simplifies everything related to pay. We're talking about setting a national minimum wage floor, making sure bonuses are paid on time, everything about your paycheck, all under one unified law.
Next, there's the Industrial Relations Code. This one is all about the core relationship between employers and employees. Think trade unions, rules for strikes, and the whole process for settling disputes. It's the rule book for how everyone gets along.
Then we have the Code on Social Security. This is your safety net, right? Things like insurance, retirement funds, maternity benefits. A really key goal here was to stretch that safety net to cover people who were often left out before, like gig economy workers.
And finally, number 4, the Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code. The name pretty much says it all. This code is focused on making sure that workplaces are safe, humane, and healthy environments for everybody.
Okay, so that's the new structure. But what does this actually feel like for the millions of workers across India? Let's take a look at how these codes are creating a whole new set of rights and protections.
And this really grounds these changes in reality. What you're looking at here is the official Gazette of India, where the Code on Wages was published. So this isn't just some policy idea, this is the actual law of the land.
So let's talk about the good stuff for employees, because there's a lot here. For the very first time, there's a universal minimum wage that applies to all workers. That includes the massive unorganized sector. Social Security is now being extended to gig and platform workers, which is a huge step for the modern economy. And look at this. Gratuity after just 1 year for fixed-term employees, mandated gender equality in pay and hiring, and they're even covering accidents that happen on your commute to work. These are some really significant upgrades in worker protection.
The reforms also take a much closer look at one of India's most vulnerable groups, migrant workers. The definition of who counts as a migrant worker has been expanded. It now includes people who move for work on their own, not just those hired through contractors. It might sound like a small change, but this simple tweak unlocks brand new benefits, like a yearly travel allowance to go see their families and access to a really important toll-free helpline.
All right, let's flip the coin. We've seen the impact on employees, but a huge goal of these reforms was to make life easier for employers and, well, encourage business growth.
For businesses, the new mantra is all about simplification. Instead of juggling tons of different registrations, licenses, and filing returns all over the place, the new system is basically a one-stop shop. One registration, one license, one return. You can imagine how much paperwork and red tape this cuts down on, freeing up time and money that can be put back into the business.
There's also a pretty big philosophical shift happening here.
The role of the inspector is being changed to an inspector-cum-facilitator. The idea is to move away from someone who is just there to police everything and towards a role that also guides and helps businesses comply with the law instead of just punishing them for mistakes.
But not every change is so straightforward. The codes also introduce a major shift in the balance of power between employers and employees, and frankly, it's one of the most debated parts of these entire reforms.
And here it is. It used to be that any company with over 100 workers needed government permission for layoffs. Well, that threshold has now been tripled to 300 workers. What that means is it's now significantly easier for larger companies to hire and fire, giving them a lot more flexibility.
And this leads us to the central question, doesn't it? Does this new flexibility for businesses come at the cost of job security for workers? Supporters will argue that yes, it boosts flexibility and it actually encourages more formal hiring, since companies won't be so hesitant to take on new employees. But critics worry that it seriously weakens job security. It's that classic debate, flexibility versus security.
So, let's zoom out and look at the grand vision here. Why go through such a massive, monumental reform? What is the government's ultimate objective?
This quote from the source material really sums it up perfectly. The stated goal is to create a win-win situation. The government believes that by simplifying the rules for businesses, while at the same time strengthening the social safety net for workers, it can create a system that drives economic growth that is both inclusive and sustainable.
And so, that's where we'll leave it. These new labor codes are a historic move to modernize India's economy. They promise simplicity for employers and new protections for workers. But the ultimate question remains, will they be able to strike that perfect, elusive balance between business growth and worker welfare? Because really, the future of India's entire workforce depends on the answer.